Thank you, everyone, for coming out, especially on this cold and snowy day, and joining us for the first session of the Public Engagement Program. And before we launch into our terrific panel, I'll give a little bit of a history for those of you who don't know where this program came about and what we're hoping to do. And it really is a team effort of a lot of really outstanding, committed scholars and public relations professionals, many of whom are in this room. So the Rutgers Public Engagement Project began as kind of an idea, probably 2-3 years ago. My colleague in sociology, Arlene Stein, and I were thinking about ways to get our research out to the world more broadly. And we have so many scholars here doing amazing research, many of whom are getting lots of media attention, but others are still trying to figure out other ways, creative ways, to bring our work to the world out there that can and should care about our work. Rutgers is so much more than the 3 Rices that were notorious a couple years ago. We want to make sure we can rely on these amazing professionals that we have working with us to help spread the word about our work. So to make a long story short, I wrote up a proposal and met with Chancellor Edwards, and he fortunately gave us a small chunk of money to make this go. And the way we're envisioning it is really to have the first semester, which is now, to be a series of symposia just like this, where we bring in the experts and we have sessions for anybody who wants to come and listen and have Q&A and talk about our ideas and talk about advice from the professionals. And then next semester, it'll be smaller. It'll be by application only. We'll have smaller groups of no more than 15. And in that case, we'll bring in paid professionals, an op-ed writing course, for instance, media training where you're actually on air and you can't accommodate 50 people in a group. So these are some of the things we're hoping to do, working with the talent we have in the university, reaching out and really using our resources so we can communicate what we're doing to a broader public in the many different channels that there are available to us. So that's an overview of the program, and we're so delighted to have those of you who braved the cold at 4:30 on a Thursday today for our very first session. And I'll give just a little overview of the sessions that will follow and give kind of a shout out to the other PEP committee members who have been so integral in putting this program together. So our first one is today, and even though I'm standing up and holding the microphone, I couldn't have done this without the help of Kim Manning and Greg Trevor, who sat with me for a long meeting, and I know they wanted to go home at 5:30 on this wintry day, but they really sat and helped to draft the program and to come up with a list of the best possible speakers that we could have. And so Kim, I think, needs no introduction, but you probably all know Kim Manning, but she's Vice President for University Communications and Marketing. And so although she's not up on the panel here physically, she played an integral role. And Greg Trevor, who many of you know is on the panel also, was very helpful as we kind of thought about all the amazing scholars who could serve on the panel. And Greg, as you know, and you'll hear more about in a moment, is the Senior Director of University News and Media Relations. So that's our program today that I'll say a little bit more about in a moment. But just to foreshadow what we have coming down the pipeline, we're trying to think of topics that different scholars would want and different media they would want to use. Some people are very adept on radio or TV, but they haven't yet gone into the virtual world of tweeting. Likewise, younger folks know how to tweet and Twitter and Twerk and all the other TWs, but maybe they're a little bit less adept holding a microphone or speaking with a reporter. So we're trying to come up with all these different approaches that might work. So our next one, which is actually next week, is organized by Jocelyn Crowley of the Blaustein School. Our next session coming up is communicating with the mass media on air and in print, and we'll have a producer and other media people there really to talk about what do you do once you're on the radio or on the television? How do you not look like a deer in headlights and be concise and witty and all that good stuff? Then in March, we have a panel that is co-organized by Angelique Hogerud, who's in the audience, from anthropology, and I apologize if I mangled your name, Arlene Stein in sociology, and Marley Wasserman, who's director of Rutgers Press, and her contingent is here in the audience. That session is on writing books for general audiences. We all know how to write for journals and for academic presses, but some folks want to reach out to different kinds of presses, crossover audiences, and popular presses. So that's a really exciting program with both academics and agents and publishers. So that's coming down the pike in March. Then our one after that is called Developing an Online Presence, Website, Social Media, and Blogging for Academies. And that we have some real expert folks. That's organized largely by Mary Chaco of Sky and Ginny Yans of the History Department. And they've chosen some Rutgers faculty who have really great websites and tweeting and Twittering and all these other things that I don't yet understand, but I hope to learn about. And then finally, our last program, which will be in May, is communicating with policymakers Makers, How Researchers Can Forge Social Change, and that's being organized by Peter McDonough, who's Executive Vice President of something really big here at the university. It's a long title, External Affairs. And he actually spent many years working with and around policymakers in Trenton. And yet another venue we have for communicating is, how do you testify? How do you persuade policymakers? You're doing this research, you think your results are translation, have potential for translation. How do we get the ear of policymakers, and what do we do once we have their ear? So we'll have a panel also in May for that, and please spread the word. The more people we have signing up on our website and the more evidence we have of interest is data we can use to perhaps get continued funds to bring in speakers and to bring in trainers and to sponsor these events. So please spread the word. And if you have needs that you feel are not being met, just send an email, and we'll try to figure out a way to develop the program in such a way that it achieves that which you're hoping it for it to achieve. So that's about the program overall. I just realized I didn't introduce myself. So who am I? I'm Deborah Carr, professor of sociology. I helped make this thing go. And I'll be moderating today. So I'll introduce the panelists. They will speak one by one. And then we're just going to open the floor to conversation. You can ask questions of us, make suggestions, ask questions of one another. And then we have, like I said, a really great panel that has two types of people here, consistent with what the title of our panel is today, which is, what is the title of our panel today? The goal of today's panel is for academics to understand how we can use the expertise in media relations, but likewise media relations wants to convey to scholars and academics how we can be most adept, how we can use their services in a way that will have the highest payoff. And they have lots of tips. Many of us have benefited from their help through the years. And so you'll first be hearing from Greg Trevor, who's Senior Director, University News and Media Relations. Greg has served as the Senior Director of the Office of Media Relations here since March 2004. And prior to that time, he was a Senior Information Officer for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, where he managed the Port Authority's regional and national media campaign, especially promoting the redevelopment of the World Trade Center after 9/11 terrorist attacks. So he will be speaking first. And then next, our second presenter will be Carla Cantor, who I think many of you know, who's a science communicator with University News and Media Relations and also the managing editor of Rutgers Today, something you're all familiar with. And Carla joined the Office of Media Relations in 2002. And she served as editor of the university's faculty and staff newspaper before becoming managing editor of Rutgers Today in 2009. Before that, she actually was in the virtual world. She was editorial director of the Health Channel at America Online, and she also worked as an editor for CBS Health Watch. And you'll start to hear about the stories that she still does today that sit at that intersection of health and social sciences and humanities. So she will be our second speaker. And then we will have two faculty members who not only are star researchers, but also are regular media presences, and they do it very well, due in part to the assistance and guidance they've gotten from their fellow panelists. So first we'll have Sarah McMahon, who's an assistant professor at the School of Social Work and the associate director for the Center on Violence Against Women and Children. Her research interests obviously focus on the prevention, measurement, and etiology of violence against women and children. But she's perhaps best known in her capacity as the Associate Director of the Center on Violence Against Women and Children. And she recently completed an evaluation of Screaming to Prevent Violence, a bystander intervention program out of the Office for Violence Prevention and Victim Assistance at Rutgers. But she's also very well known for doing really exciting research that led to, and let's see if I get this right, a task force in the the U.S. Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women used this information, and the Obama administration actually took their data and analyses and used it in public statements and programs. So there's a lot of outreach there, and she can tell you in much greater detail than I can the complexities of it and the importance of it, and how media relations help to spread the word about that work. And then finally, we have David Robinson on the end, who is professor of geography and the New Jersey State climatologist. He knows a lot about snow. We will not ask him about snowfall today, but given his expertise as an earth scientist and a physical geographer, and someone who really is an expert who maintains an internationally recognized database of northern hemisphere snow, he is in tremendous demand, as you can imagine, in his capacity as not only a snow expert, but the New Jersey State climatologist. And as you can imagine, he's a little mediated out this week after having been the focus of many, many different reports. But these two panelists not only have expertise as scholars and communicators, but as you get the sense, they'll underscore for you that it doesn't matter the field of research, whether you're doing geography or chemistry or social sciences or humanities. Different types of research can be presented to the public in clear ways. And so we picked two examples, really just to give an example of the breadth of work at Rutgers that can be communicated clearly with the assistance of media relations. So with that, we will pass the mic over to Brad.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm going to put this up here, and hopefully this will work. Okay, and then let me get my very brief, I swear, slideshow presentation together. Okay, all right, hang on. Wait a minute. Broadcast from beginning, thank you. Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Thanks to everyone for coming out. Despite David's best efforts to give us an unprecedented blizzard, we appreciate everybody coming out despite the cold, and fortunately the sidewalks are pretty clear these days. It is really a pleasure to be here today because one of the things that my staff and I always love to do is take an opportunity to meet with the people who are doing some of the most exciting research that's taking place anywhere, but especially here at Rutgers, and to talk about how we can collaborate to do all we can to raise even more public awareness, understanding, and appreciation of that work. This is just a very brief overview of our department, our unit, excuse me, University News and Media Relations. We have many responsibilities, but this is one of our primary missions. And I know you all know how to read, so I'm not going to be one of those people who shows you a slide and then reads the slide. But the bottom line is we are here to try to do everything we can to reach the public at large with the most important things that we do, both directly through the web and indirectly through the media. So I wanted to do a little bit of an overview of the media landscape at this time. One of the great things that my boss, Kim Manning, allowed me to do was just to hire someone who's an expert in metrics, and she actually put this slide together for me in her first week here. So unfortunately, she couldn't be here today, or else I would have given her a shout out. I want to direct you to the upper left slide specifically. Some of the background information below that is very helpful, but the upper left slide shows you kind of the trend lines of the media landscape in which we work. For decades, broadcast media, primarily local cable national television news, have dominated print in terms of audience share. But in recent years, online, and now as you can see from the trend, even social media have surpassed print as key sources of news. In response, traditional print outlets are relying more and more on their own online and social platforms to deliver the news. But as the news delivery has changed, so too has the type and the tone of the news that is being delivered. That's because news organizations, quite frankly, are still trying to figure out how they can turn a profit in this new model. Print, circulation, advertising, particularly classified advertising, have declined tremendously. So in response, news organizations are increasingly dependent on online ads, where advertisers pay the media based on the number of times readers click on the web pages that feature those ads. And we have been told by some of the news reporters with whom we work, as well as editors, photographers, and videographers, that they are judged, and in some cases, their compensation is based on the number of clicks that their stories, photos, and videos generate. So to increase clicks, news organizations are turning more and more to what we call clickbait. Now that is the provocative headline or the enticing story. Debbie, we were talking about this before the session about, when you see things on the web that say 6 reasons you should, buy a Subaru, or 8 reasons that Donald Trump is not going to get elected president. That's a form of clickbait. Here's a recent example that directly affected Rutgers. Earlier this month, serious safety concerns about hoverboards, those little devices with the wheels that can sometimes catch fire, and I know some people in the audience have actually purchased for their children, who I've seen outside, but you told me you got one of the good ones, so that's okay. The university has instituted a temporary ban on hoverboards pending the outcome of a federal product safety investigation. So I'm just going to run through a few of the headlines, and I want you to see if you can spot the clickbait. Okay, those are both fairly straightforward. Very good. Now, for those of you not familiar with NJ.com, the news organization that's cited here, that is the web address for the Star Ledger, which is the state's largest newspaper. And those of you who have been at Rutgers for a while probably know that shall we say, the university and the Star Ledger have a bit of a complex relationship. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes difficult. And for further evidence about how this clickbait might have been specifically more about Rutgers than about the subject matter, here's the headline from the story 9 days earlier when Kean University banned hoverboards. Slightly less provocative and anger-inducing. And that's one of the interesting things about clickbait. Not only sometimes does it entice, but sometimes it is designed to aggravate. One of the things you will see if you deign to dare to go to the bottom of stories at NJ.com is you will see dozens and dozens of reader comments about these stories. And that's another way that the writers are being judged, which is the number of comments that they're generating. Sometimes it's people arguing back and forth ad nauseum about a variety of issues. But this is part of the world in which they work, and frankly, it's the reality of the world in which we work. Fortunately, there is some good news. Despite the changes in the markets, there are still plenty of opportunities for us to work together with you to effectively engage the public about your research. This slide and the following slide, I did a quick search of our coverage over the last almost 3 years to find examples of Rutgers University New Brunswick and Rutgers Biomedical and Health Sciences schools that have had faculty research featured in the New York Times since integration on July 2013. I believe there's about 12 schools on the 2 slides, and we listed some of the examples of it. I should give a shout out to Andrea Alexander on our staff for the Rutgers strawberry story. This is about the new strawberries that are being bred from NJAES. She actually drove them to New York to give them to the food editor of the New York Times so we could secure a food section feature about the new strawberries. So that gives you some extent of the length in which we're willing to go to get a good story. And then here's the next page, which lists some of the other schools where we've had that. And one of the things we have is my staff has people who work both in terms of promoting all aspects of the university, but we also have some specific people who we inherited from the integration, who came from UMD&J, who do an outstanding job and have been very good at helping us navigate our way through the RBHS world, and particularly the world of RBHS research. The next slide here is I want to give you an example. We talked before about social media, about how you can successfully leverage social media. Has anybody seen the video that was on Rutgers today about the drone that can both fly through the air and swim underwater? Thank you. I'm glad a couple of people, some people saw it. Good. Well, those of you who haven't are kind of in the minority, because as you can see, this video, that's our video with the Rutgers Today logo, was picked up by this tech site, Vocative, which does a lot of work about tech news around the world, and they posted it on their Facebook page. And the number there is this was as of about a week ago, the total number of views that have taken place of our video, more than 10 million. And to put that in perspective, 10 million is greater than the total audience for all network evening news shows combined. So that's a huge audience. That's been by far our most successful video. But some of the stories that we put out there get tremendous pickup as well as by news organizations as well as readership. Debbie's research that we promoted about a little more than a year ago about Happy Wife, Happy Life generated 415 stories around the country, actually around the world, as well as generating more than 200,000 views on our site. And my favorite was the story, because it was research done in collaboration with the University of Michigan, was the NBC Nightly News piece that featured the wedding cake graphic with the Michigan M and the Rutgers R, like they were getting married, which I thought was extremely clever and told the story very well. So those are the kinds of examples of how something can really take off successfully to help highlight not only the fact that research is being conducted, but that it's important. And that's the last thing I want to talk about before I turn this over to Carla, which is how we can help you reach the broadest possible audience with your research. Over the years, my staff and I have analyzed literally hundreds of promotional campaigns, both our campaigns, campaigns of our colleagues at Rutgers, and campaigns of colleagues at other institutions. When deciding how best to use our limited resources, we find that it's helpful to think about these three terms: significance, relevance, benefit. Now, what do we mean by that? I mean, the words are pretty self-evident, but when we look at a promotional opportunity, we ask ourselves first, significance. How big a game changer is the research? Is it something that's an incremental change, or is it something that really is going to have a significant impact? How will it make, one of the questions we ask is, how will it make the future different from the past? How will tomorrow be different from today as a result of this research? And how broad is the impact? Is the impact regional? Is the impact national? Is the impact worldwide? If you look at the slide, on the first slide, when we talked about Rutgers today, we have a couple of research stories that we have up there that were up there earlier this week. One was David Greenberg's new book, The Republic of Spin, which is getting a tremendous amount of attention, all about how spin has been a part of presidential politics and presidential communications for more than a century. And another was a wonderful story about Bitcoin, these things that people are using, and kind of how Bitcoin is used, how Bitcoin is understood and its limitations. And then one that just came out, I think, Carla, was it, we were promoting it yesterday, which was research out of New Jersey Medical School about how when children text late at night before they go to bed, if they stay up late to text their friends, it actually affects their school performance. So far, in less than a day, we've gotten more than 80 stories. It's been featured in Forbes. It's going to be featured in New York Magazine next week. I mean, these are the kinds of things that really do, these are significant. And then the other thing they are is they have relevance. And what we mean by relevance is, how can this research affect the life of the average person? Is it something where the results will resonate with them? And this is one of the more challenging things we deal with on a regular basis, which is not that we decide, well, this is going to resonate or this isn't going to resonate, but to work with faculty to say, okay, let's help explain to people why they should care about this. Why is this important? What are the potential long-term impacts that could affect their lives? And a lot of times, the more we can talk about it, the more we can work through it, and frankly, the more time we have on the front end to really talk this through and brainstorm it with the faculty member, the better the chances we have. And that leads to the third word, which is benefit, which is, not only is this big and not only is this something people can relate to, but can we definitively say it's going to make things better? So those three words all together, we evaluate the work we're going to do. We evaluate where we're going to put our finite resources into how we can answer those questions. And frankly, the stronger the answers to those questions, the higher the likelihood. Now, I'm going to stress, there are never any guarantees with the media. I mean, we could have had a story ready to go this weekend that would have been completely obliterated by David Storm. But the bottom line is, we try to do the best we can in a probability and outcome world to maximize the likelihood that we're not only going to be able to interest the media, but we're also going to be able to interest the public in the kind of work that you do. And now I'm going to turn it over to Carla, who's going to discuss the tools at our disposal and to walk you through a recent success story. Carla?
It's a very, very special tool, and I don't know how many of you read Rutgers Today on a regular basis, but it comes to your mailbox Mondays and Thursdays, which just highlights what's on the site that particular day. But we do change the content every single day during the academic year. And aside from the 26,000 faculty and staff who get all kinds of articles that we do, features, videos about all the positive things happening here at the university, we also have a subscriber list of alumni and members of the media and whoever else subscribes to Rutgers Today. There's a little button at the bottom of the page. But what we produce for Rutgers Today goes far beyond getting it in your mailbox. We put everything. We have an expression in our office. We post what we pitch, and we pitch what we post. So most of what you'll see in Rutgers Today is pitched in a variety of ways. We pitch through social media. We have Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, with about 300 300,000 followers. And we also have targeted pitching. Our office has built media lists. We now have about 16 or 17 that we send out to the media. But we also use our special relationships. We have tools that allow us to take a subject like autism and really drill down to who's covering autism all over the world and who are the social influencers in that area. I will tell you that in the year 2015, climate change was our number one story topic. It generated more than 2,000 stories featuring our researchers and experts and a combined audience of 18 million viewers. And that's the audience we can track through audited paid newspaper readership, Nielsen's rating TV, and documented social media followers. And lastly, Rutgers Today is known by journalists, some who go to our page every day, and they'll get in touch with us. For instance, last week, I don't know how many of you saw the story about Donald Roden. He's a Rutgers history professor who has he founded a prison to college program called Mountain View, and well, we ran a story as part of our Rutgers Revolutionary series, which features people and innovations, Rutgers people, and programs that have changed the world. And we'll be running that all year, and he was one of them. And a reporter from the Ledger called and said, "We just saw the story on your site, and here's the Rutgers Today story. Donald Roden, the professor who founded a prison to college program that provides a second chance, one of our Rutgers revolutionaries." And they decided to publish the same story with the byline of our writer in our office, Robin Lally. Rutgers Today, they have the only difference is they have a little bit of a different headline: "Meet ex-prisoners who owe college degrees to a Rutgers professor." And at the end of it, this is the Star Ledger, they say, "The article was written by Robin Lally of Rutgers Today and is used with permission." So, this kind of thing happens all the time, and it's tremendously exciting for us, at least. I don't know how. I used to be a journalist, and sometimes I worry about the profession. One of the facts I can give you about is that since Rutgers Today launched in September 2009, it has generated more than 30,000 positive stories, 60% of them about research, and with a combined audience of about 70 million. When we work with you, we'll work to create a story that really fits the type of news you have. We have different templates. We have a research news template. We have Q&A formats, and we've worked with people on trend topics for Q&A, as well as breaking news. For instance, in 2011, when bin Laden was killed, that morning we got in early and we said, how can we get out there? We found a professor in Camden who had written a book on the topic. We had a Q&A posted with him up by maybe 11:30 that morning. And what happens is our stories go out on Google News, and when reporters who, they don't have a lot of staff now, so they search Google News, and up comes not only an expert can talk to you about, but 4 questions and a photo, and you already have your story. So we were able to get this guy out. And that requires, really being able to get in touch with people quickly, putting something together. You're really on a dime. But it doesn't always have to be breaking news. It can be trending topics like Bitcoin. Could have been a Q&A like that. It ended up being a study. So one thing I'd like to do, and I'm doing this in a colleague's place. Robin Lally is our science communicator who had a death in her family this week. And we wanted to take you through an example of a very successful research story. So I'm going to, if I may, read my notes here because this was really her baby.
While Carla's looking that up, I wanted to make one point following up on what she said. She talked about a situation where a story will be picked up word for word or a video broadcast frame for frame that we generate. We just did a count today. Since we launched Rutgers Today in 2009, we have had more than 3,700 stories reprinted or rebroadcast verbatim, either in whole or in part by the news media. And it includes the Ledger, it includes the Washington Post, it includes NBC Nightly News, it includes the Chronicle of Higher Education. And the reason we think that that's so valuable is at a time when we're trying to reach the public directly, it's so important to be able to get that message out unfiltered. And because we are creating content in collaboration with you and your colleagues that is credible, that is important, and that resonates with the public, we're actually able to reach people directly through the media with our own work. So I just wanted to make that point, Carla.
All right, so here's an example of a research story that actually had a shelf life of more than 2 years. Rutgers discovered a new frog species in the Northeast. It was the first one in more than 30 years. So while discovering new species in remote rainforests is common, finding this one in the ponds and marshes of, can everybody hear me? Finding this one in the ponds and marshes of Staten Island, mainland New York, and New Jersey was a surprise to the scientists from Rutgers University, UCLA, UC Davis, and the University of Alabama who worked together to make the discovery. The joint research was published in 2012. Researchers from all 4 universities worked together with their individual media relations teams to get the story ready for publication as soon as the embargo was lifted. So before the study ever came out, we got an early copy and we had our releases, or I kind of use news stories and releases interchangeably. We're finding that your very kind of straight news release or press release we use it more for institutional board of governors announcement. We like to put things in a research news template or a news template. We have about 8 of them that we use, and the story really dictates, what's best. So at Rutgers, Jeremy Feinberg, a postdoc working with his advisor and co-author Joanna Berger, professor in the Department of Cell Biology and Neuroscience, reached out to media relations, giving us a couple of weeks to get the news story ready for release. The initial story was published in the New York Times March 13th in 2012. We had given Lisa Fodorero, a longtime Metro reporter and a friend of the office, an early embargoed copy of the story. So she got out the New York Times story a day ahead of us, which was designed. Then we pitched the story to other media outlets, and it was featured in hundreds of publications throughout the world, as well as radio and broadcast media. Both Feinberg and Berger were available to do interviews by telephone and in person, traveling to New York to do live broadcasts. And that's a really important point. Sometimes when we publish a study, we usually like to get it out right when the embargo lifts on the study, if we can. But sometimes a researcher is going to be in Timbuktu, and there's no way they can be available for interviews. And that doesn't really make sense. So if we have to work very closely with the researcher to make sure that they're available for calls and possibly even telecast. 2 years later, this is 2014 now, Feinberg and Berger released a new research paper with scientists from UCLA, Yale, Louisiana State University, SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife that provided the critical evidence needed to formally describe and name the new frog, and also presented information on the distribution, ecology, and conservation status of the species. An added news hook: we were able to announce that the research team had given a scientific name to the new species, Rana caufeldi, named for Carl Caufeld, who died in 1974 at the age of 63. Caufeld, who was once the director of the Staten Island Zoo, had believed he'd found a new species of this leopard frog as far back as the 1930s, but his theories were dismissed because the DNA testing tools weren't there. This new research announcement garnered even more media interest than the one in 2012. Once again, Feinberg and Berger were available for interviews, and the story appeared in the Christian Science Monitor, the LA Times, the New Yorker, as well as being named one of the top 10 discoveries in Newsweek. That's it.
I'm just getting this off the screen. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out today, and I want to thank Dr. Carr and Kim and Greg for including me on today's panel. And congratulations on this project. I think it's really exciting and a nice way to figure out how we can showcase a lot of the excellent scholarship that happens here at Rutgers. One of the main projects that I was asked to discuss today was a campus climate assessment project that I led last year. So a little bit, just very brief about what this project was, is that it was an evaluation of students' perceptions, their attitudes, and their beliefs around sexual violence on college campuses. And some of you may have heard that this issue has certainly been receiving a lot more attention in the national media, and it's been elevated to a new level of discussion. So as someone who's been working in the field for many years, I was a practitioner before a researcher. It wasn't anything that was new, but it was certainly something that's been receiving a lot more attention. And there are a number of reasons why that probably happened, some of which because students have really engaged in some amazing organizing on their campuses and brought it to the attention of universities, demanding action. Some of it because the Obama administration has made this one of their priority issues. And so for all of these reasons, it's sort of become a hot topic issue. So one of the things that President Obama and Vice President Biden did was to create a White House task force to protect students from sexual assault. And we were privileged to be invited as one of 4 universities to partner with the White House in their efforts to address this issue. And specifically, we were tasked to pilot a campus climate survey tool. So that was my job in 2014, 2015, was to pilot this tool. And the purpose of our project was, we had 2 parallel purposes. One was to use it as a way to really gather some meaningful data here at Rutgers, New Brunswick, and then to use that data in a way that we could improve the climate for our students and be responsive. And the second purpose was to provide feedback to the White House Task Force about the process, about what was involved with engaging with this project, as well as the tool itself. So we began the project in fall of 2014 and finished September of 2015. And we presented the results both to Rutgers and to our community here. And then we also provided a report to the White House Task Force in September. And I think because of the affiliation with the White House and because it's a hot topic issue, the project received a lot of attention in the media, including newsprint, radio, and online. And I had a steep learning curve, and it was a really interesting experience. When I was trying to reflect on this, the 2 words that came to me were that it was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. So on one hand, as you can imagine, it was really satisfying to be able to contribute to this national conversation on this topic that's so important to me. To represent Rutgers, whom I really genuinely believe is doing a good job on this topic. So that made it a lot easier to be able to talk about this issue, knowing that I had support and I was able to talk with authenticity about the efforts that Rutgers was making. And for a researcher to have the opportunity to share research on an issue that I've spent a lot of my career working on was quite satisfying. On the other hand, obviously this is a topic that's really sensitive. It's somewhat controversial. In addition, there were some time pressures that came in to release the results more quickly than a researcher in our ideal world would like to check and recheck every statistic to make sure everything's accurate with space to do that. So there were some time pressures, and there was a very public debate about the methodologies that were being used to look at campus climates and sexual assault, about definitions and approaches. So all of this was sort of happening at the same time, which was leading to really increased scrutiny of this type of research. So presenting it to media outlets such as NPR and the Washington Post was nerve-wracking, and it was especially such as a tenure-track professor. And so I am forever indebted to Kim, Greg, EJ, and their team at University News and Media Relations. They provided really invaluable guidance based on their wisdom, their experience, and I was so incredibly impressed with how they approached this project and the expertise that they provided. They asked really good questions that made me think about what it was I was trying to convey, to stop using some of the jargon that maybe didn't make sense to others, how to condense pages and pages of data. So we had the survey that we had 12,000 students reply to, and then we had also conducted 21 focus groups. So we just had a ton of data, and they helped us condense it into a little bit more than one page takeaway points about our study. They were really supportive and organized, and one of the things that I love most about them is that they were very calming. So I had many questions, and everything sort of happened at once when we rolled out the results. I have in my notes that they were, always available to answer questions. They made themselves very available, even for late night conversations. And Greg reminded me when I came in today, he said, "Are you going to mention, the time that I was a little concerned about a question I had received from a reporter, and I was replaying it in my mind and thinking it over and over. And I finally reached out to Greg, pulled him out of something he was probably enjoying, finally being away from this whole topic. And he was just very patient and took the time to really walk through it with me. And I was trying to figure out how to do it in the best way possible. And he said he remembers me saying, "Can you hold on 1 second, Greg?" And I said, "No, Mom cannot watch America's Got Talent right now. We have a few other things that we need to figure out." So he was very patient through all of that, and they just made themselves really available to help with the nerves. As someone who wasn't very experienced in speaking or working with the media, they really held my hand through it. I learned a lot from them that hopefully I can take with me in the future. So the importance of being accurate and clear and concise. I learned that it's better to pause and think through something rather than rushing through an answer. And that it's helpful to list out all the dreaded questions that you're afraid you may receive and figure out how you're going to address them ahead of time. Their office is really a gem. It has incredible expertise at our university, and one that can provide tools and guidance to those who are interacting with the media. So overall, things went pretty well, but not without some bumps in the road. I had certain findings that I really wanted to emphasize. I thought it was really important, for example, that we found that 1/4 of our students come to Rutgers reporting having experienced some form of sexual violence before coming to campus. But many of the questions posed from the media really wanted to focus on victimization rates and how we calculated those. So I received a lot of tips from their office on how to steer the conversation to still make the points that I thought were really important from our study. I also had a vision of, how I wanted this to spur further conversation on these topics, and some of that happened and some of it didn't. But despite this, the results of the experience have been really overwhelmingly positive. One of the things I'm most pleased with is that an action plan was developed here at Rutgers and is being rolled out on the New Brunswick campus this year. We're currently also engaging in the study in the Newark and Camden campuses. Our report and recommendations to the White House were posted as part of their resource page on this topic. And 2 weeks ago, I was able to present the results on Capitol Hill and to the White House Advisor on Violence Against Women. So looking back, there are a number of factors I think that came into play that allowed this experience to happen. Some of it was really good luck and timing. So as I mentioned, I've been in this field forever, and if you had asked me 15, 20 years ago if I thought it would be something of interest to the media, I probably would have made some snarky comment about how they didn't take it seriously and wasn't going to be paid attention. But I think it's a reminder that you sort of never know what topic's going to be next, what could happen in the news that could spark people's interest in it. So being prepared is really important. And you also don't know for how long it's going to be hot, what the next topic is. So there's a window of time that may or may not open. I also learned that it's really important to put your work out there and to make it accessible, especially online. So one of my first interactions with the media was actually after I completed my dissertation, which was on sexual violence in athletes. And shortly after that, the Duke lacrosse incident occurred. And one of the reporters, I ended up working and doing an interview for CNN, and one of the things that they said is they were just Googling student athletes and sexual violence, and a report that I had done and posted on the website for the center where I worked at that time came up. So I think those are quick things that all of us can do, is making sure that we're putting our work out there. One of the best pieces of advice that I received from a mentor years ago was to reach out to the best researchers in my field and to see if they would collaborate with me. So I had worked really hard on a paper. I was almost done with it, and I did. I reached out to whom I considered to be one of the best in the field and asked if she would be willing to co-author the paper with me. And I'm so glad that I did that, because since then we've formed a really great relationship. She's provided a lot of mentoring to me. And she's really regarded as one of the leaders in the field. And when she became too overwhelmed to answer questions from the media, she would think of me and she would pass those opportunities along to me. So I'm very grateful to her for that. And it definitely, I was a little nervous about first reaching out to this person, but it's had tremendous benefits. So I think especially for those of us who are more junior faculty, that if we can put ourselves out there and connect with other people who are leaders, it can help us as well. Also, engaging in service and obtaining leadership positions can lead to opportunities for the media. So, for example, I'm also chair of our New Jersey's Domestic Violence Fatality Near Fatality Review Board. So sometimes, unfortunately, if there's a fatality or a domestic violence incident, I may be called upon from that role. So being engaged and being involved in different organizations, I think, can open up opportunities as well. One of the other things that I learned from the most recent project is to also think about having a media rollout built in as part of your project from the beginning. And that was not something that I was really familiar with doing. So Kim and Greg and their team introduced and coached me through this idea. And I definitely did not appreciate nor consider how much time that just the rollout itself would take. So one of my recommendations to others who contact me about doing campus climate projects or research in general is that from the beginning to think about how it is that you want to disseminate the results and what that's going to look like. Thinking about how the results will be used, starting to let people know that you're doing this project, and considering who might be interested in hearing the results. And once the project's complete, to invite others to come learn about it. So in an evaluation that I did of the Peer Education Theater program here at Rutgers, we held a little event after the results were out to talk about what the findings meant, what their implications were, and we invited legislators and others in the field, and that has certainly been another avenue for generating some interest. So these are just a few thoughts and ideas based on my own experience. I know we have others who might have some other tips. So we have so many great researchers here at Rutgers. I think it's important for us to get our work out there and to have an influence. So thanks for your time and for your ear tonight.
Good afternoon, early evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for organizing this and bringing it to the attention of the university. I think anything we can do to promote Rutgers and the positive aspects of what we do is laudable and should be done. And I guess I've been part of that mix for a long time. People may complain about the weather. They may complain about the climate. Somewhat non-controversial with some of the things I discuss, unless we get into climate change and things of that nature. So I really kind of wear two hats when it comes to dealing with the media. Some of it's directly with my global research with snow cover, the cryosphere in general, the disappearing snow and ice, and with any kind of international climate episode. I'm a member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which provides the report card every several years, and there's about 5 or 6 others at the university, and Rutgers Media has helped to cover that. So indirectly, I've had interaction with folks here, and national climate assessments and things like that I'm involved with. You know, and I was thinking the difference between what I do in dealing with my research versus my role as state climatologist. I've 27, almost 28 years at Rutgers, and I'm in my 25th year as state climatologist. So I had a little experience with talking to the media, you might say. But first I want to talk a little bit about research and the media. Sarah was much better with that in terms of particular research projects and all. A lot of mine is off the cuff, what's going to happen next week with weather and climate. But I found what attracts the attention is a new paper. I might produce a new research project, or perhaps the research project someone else has been involved with, not just at Rutgers, but elsewhere, where they'll turn to an expert at Rutgers. Kind of the old locals trusting locals in a way. If they're reaching out from New Jersey, they want to get the perspective of someone at the state university who might have on it. Sometimes it's extreme conditions. I've been on ABC World News tonight talking about wildfires out west. I'm not an expert on wildfires out west. I published one paper about snow cover and its relationship to wildfires. It's really kind of interesting with climate change. But anyway, you never know what they're going to ask you. So you just come on, and I've been on national news talking about the polar vortex, if you remember, 2 years ago. And I made the wonderful comment of twisty, curvy jet stream, which is, I can't say sinuous. You have to pick the words out for national. But I should have said wavy instead of twisty, curvy. But of course, the reporter out of Washington finished standing along the Potomac talking about twisty, curvy jet stream. So I may have started a new terminology. But what I found with research and the engagement at the national level and all, and I've worked with the New York Times in the past in their Science Times, you have the luxury of spending some time sometimes formulating things. You can work with the reporter. I've even seen drafts of some of what they're producing for magazines or newspapers. I've had a chance to comment. I've had a chance to work with their graphics staff and go back and forth. So to me, that's a luxury. If you've got a week or two before they put something out on your research in Science Times or whatever. But I have found that, and I also find you can talk at a little bit higher level there, because you have to know who you're talking to and what their education level might be. So that's kind of a pleasure at times. What's changed there, because there was a question about, as we formulated this, about talking about change, is that there's fewer features. I think they've disbanded staffs of scientifically literate journalists and environmental journalists. And I've seen that at the national level and certainly at the state level. So that's kind of it. I wanted to concentrate more on what I do in terms of the state climate program, because I tend to do a lot more of that. I give, on average, about 350 media interviews a year on state issues, a couple of dozen on my research. It's steady, but it has its periods of time of activity. The last week, it's been 35 interviews. It started before the blizzard arrived, when it reached the forecast media. I was doing them in the midst of the storm, and I've done some postmortems this week as we find out what happened. Will it happen again? Is it El Nino causing it? And things like that. So how do we attract media attention? Well, we create a blizzard. We create a superstorm. Throw in a little drought now and again, although it's been 10 years, and that's when I gave over 500 interviews, because drought goes on forever. Storms come and go. Or try changing the climate. Or 2 years ago, how about hosting a Super Bowl in your state? I did a report for the State Police Office of Emergency Management on what might be expected before the storm. Not before the storm, before the Super Bowl and the Super Bowl week and so on and so forth. And we decided to put a website out, and people drew people's attention I ended up on an NFL pregame show on CBS in New York City. To me, that's the best. When I make the front page of the Star Ledger sports section, or get on the sports network or whatever, that's a lot of fun for me. So that's how we attract it. I mean, you never know what's going to come next. The engagement is newspapers, from Fish Wrappers to the Times. I was with the San Francisco Chronicle. They talked to me this weekend because they wanted to know about the storm back east. I don't know how they found me. Radio, I do a little bit of TV, online things, some of these local online things. Some of it's live, most of it's taped when I do that. We have a website that we post articles on, and that gets attention. We have a list of people we will say, Robinson's written his monthly report. December got a lot of hits. December was warmer than all but 17 Novembers in the last century plus, so it got a little bit of attention. So they find us. I don't work with media relations a lot here because I've created a monster of my own. I think in my 25 years as state climatologist, I put out 1 or 2 press releases. That's it, because they know where to find. I don't think that's good enough. I think we should work together more. Sometimes it's just a matter of time. On the Super Bowl, I also did something on Big Ten weather, and it came at the end of June before we joined the Big Ten, and I never got out. So sometimes vacations and the 4th of July get in the way of things. But if you ever want to do something, I've got all the stats on what's the snowiest Big Ten school and what's the rainiest and what's hotter. I thought it'd be a lot of fun to do. So it's never too late for that. The key is, for me, is people want to, I don't forecast the weather. We do not put out weather forecasts, so we're not going to AccuWeather or Weather Channel or whatever. But it's to put context around what's going on. Give it a historic perspective as we enter it and as we pull out of a particular event. Talk about the range of possible outcomes. I was trying to explain different climate models last week and how they were pretty good in unanimity, but there were some differences amongst them. Last year, this week, I had to explain why the storm went 100 miles to the east and dumped on Boston and missed us. So sometimes you have to talk about things like that. So that's what I do. I try to interpret. Sometimes it's dealing with weather and climate 101 when I'm talking to reporters and things like that. Some keys, as I was thinking of, how to go about doing this, how to engage the media, how to get the word out there. First of all, you have to know your audience. And sometimes you have to ask the media where it's going. If you've never heard of them, who's going to be reading this? Who do you serve? So that's kind of important. And don't be afraid to ask that. And of course, adjust your contribution accordingly. It is important to know if they're from San Francisco or with the Super Bowl. I was doing an interview with Denver meteorologist who came to town. She emailed me yesterday and said, you know any climatologists out near San Francisco I could interview when I'm out there for the Super Bowl in a week? So you have to determine what you think people should remember. You can't tell them everything. I could talk forever about this. I'm an idiot savant of climate data and all. But you have to pick out some key points that you think it's important that you want them to know. And this is different than how we normally approach our work in the State Climate Office, because there we're working a lot of time with decision makers, and we're not telling them what they need. Instead, we're working with them and say, well, we have this toolbox here, we have this data, how could we help you answer a question, solve a problem with that information? But it's a little different when you're dealing with the media. You don't necessarily have that opportunity. You have to kind of be ready to jump in with your knowledge on a particular incident. I think you have to have several core messages in mind. You mentioned listening, I think. You need to listen to their questions, not just be ready to give a robotic answer, even if it's the 10th or 12th interview you've given in a day. I often find you have to treat everyone the same. It may not go over well at some at this table, But if a fish wrapper comes in with a question before the New York Times, I'll probably call them before I call the New York Times. But I'll get to the New York Times. I often find that the New York Times is one of the worst in not citing you when they take information from you, by the way. I've been a little. But then again, most of the time, I don't even go see what they've printed. That's probably better in some cases, I suppose. But treat everyone the same, because they'll know it. They'll recognize it if you're giving one the short end, and because they're the Two River Times and not the New York Times. I talked to the Two River Times yesterday. Tell a story. It's all about telling a story, not just rambling with facts and figures. Think about sound bites. When I talk to radio or TV, I have to talk to them differently than a newspaper because I know they're looking for those sound bites. Yeah, sometimes I know when I've given them a quotable quote. You know, it's kind of fun. Don't let them lead you into something, though. I had a reporter on Sunday evening try to lead me into a 35-inch snowfall total for the state because the Weather Service on their national report said that. The local Weather Service didn't. What do you think? I said, I don't think it's correct. And then he kept pestering me. And I was tired. I had been skiing, cross-country skiing. I had been shoveling snow because my snow plow operator's plow broke. And I was trying to watch a football game. So it didn't hit me the best boat. And I finally said to the person point blank, I'm not going to give you a headline. And you know what? We looked at the 35-inch ob. It's bogus. We disproved it the next day. We hadn't had a chance yet. But I'm not going to jump into their headlines. I've said several times to reporters, cost you the front page, didn't I? Because they'll say, this has never happened before. I hate the word never and ever. I'm the saltpeter for reporters sometimes when it comes to that. So tell the story. Be accessible and accommodate. I've been told I'm too accessible and accommodate too much at times, but I think it pays off in the long run. Watch your cell number, unless you want to. They do. Reporters have learned, but the ones I talk to the most have learned that number. Another thing, be prepared to be disappointed with the product. You'll read things that set science back to the time of Galileo sometimes. But other times, I am so incredibly impressed with the media. They're talking about a traffic accident or a death or something. Then they're calling me for a story, and it's amazing how they take my gibberish sometimes and make it into coherent sentences. So as many times as I've been disappointed, I've been ultimately very pleased with the way they've handled things. Steve Sterling did a piece on, I guess it was the front page of Ledger Sunday, and it was great. It was a storytelling. And I even talked about how this storm might not show all of its benefits, or not benefits, but consequences of the storm for years now, because some 6 or 8 or 10-year-old was enamored by this storm and may turn to a career in meteorology and climatology before it. And that's how he ended his story. So it was really, really a lot of fun to do that. How things have changed with time. Frankly, I'm more disappointed than anything right now. Science writers or no environmental writers have left the papers. One I dealt with greatly in the past is joining Rutgers. I'm pleased to say has joined Rutgers, but it's an absolute crime that these people aren't there anymore. I'm having to educate this newer generation. It's driving me nuts in the last, literally, recent months. And I've talked to some other journalists about this to get their feel. You've lost seasoned reporters, even if they aren't science reporters. And I had these notes before I heard earlier about this clickbait. Seemingly, reporters are being pressed for content, is what I wrote down here. The headlines are worse than ever. And I had never heard of clickbait or what you said before, but these were my notes coming into here. There's a lack of, I haven't worked with the graphics department since the Ledger must have gotten rid of their graphics department. So things have really taken, I think, a turn for the worse. However, I am pleased with some of what comes out. There are some reporters who really get it and are putting the effort into it. I'm doing more email correspondence, so that way I might be quoted better, and that's useful. I don't know if it's any more or less time-consuming in some respects. So take advantage of being able to write something out because you might be a little safer. Although make sure you know that they might be taking some of what you've written as quotes. Because I wrote this long thing one time for someone. I had no idea they were going to pull it out in pieces for quotes. So, kind of set the ground rules with folks along the way. So, overall, I wouldn't do it any different way. I enjoy doing it, engaging it. I enjoy talking about the subject, which I think is one of the more important things. But I do also think it is a service. We are the state university. And the State Climate Office, one of our things is outreach. So it's an obligation. It's a service. But I'd say oftentimes it's a pleasure. And with that, thanks very much.
Thank you to all the panelists for really wise and insightful remarks. And now, before we open the floor to questions, I think I'll toss out one question. So let's say we have a scholar in the audience who's thinking, how come I'm not in Rutgers today? How come I'm not in the New York Times? What might be the first step they can realistically take? Who to reach out to, what to do to become like one of our two faculty speakers today?
You can do one of many things. We have a website at the bottom of Rutgers Today. It says About Media Relations and lists all the people who work in our office and what their so-called beats are. We have two senior public relations specialists who deal with the sciences. And it's all divided by topic, so that way you'll know who would be most appropriate to help you out. But you're also, we gave you a general number right here on your sheet, and the person who answers the phone knows everybody's beats, knows who to get you to. And you can always call Greg directly. Is it your cell phone?
Yeah, I'm one of the dumbest people in the world. You talk about cell phones. My cell phone number is actually on the web. So if you type in my name in the search function on Rutgers.edu, you will actually get my cell number. But I will give you the same warning I give everybody else, which is if my wife gets to the phone before I do, you're on your own.
And I'd also say that, email is great. We did give you the Rutgers Today email, which they all get read. And you're welcome to do it that way. But I think getting a person either by phone or email is probably best. And especially, we love to know if you have a paper coming out, you think it might, even if you think it might be accepted, we'd like to start talking to you at that stage and find out about your research and who you are. Anything else?
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to point out is that this is actually doing these kinds of stories, telling these narratives about this groundbreaking research is actually one of the most gratifying things we do. We have to deal with a lot of things, as you might imagine. Some of them are less pleasant than others. But talking about great research and talking about the impact it could have on humanity is really, it's one of the reasons that I'm very proud to work at a university, particularly a university as prestigious as this one. One of the things we did bring with us that I'd like to give to people if they're interested is a couple of years ago we did a series. It was when integration took place, and we had a challenge, which was to try to help explain it to the public, to the people who pay our bills. As I used to say, my shorthand was why integration with UMD&J was worth our time and their money. And the point I kept making was we have to talk about new collaborations and new initiatives. And Carla and one of our other colleagues who happens to be on maternity leave right now were the co-managing editors of a series called One Rutgers, A World of Discovery, which actually talked about collaborations in the sciences, in the humanities, in the social sciences, and in engineering and some of the hard sciences across 13 different schools. And we're very proud of it. We have a reprint of it that we did. It actually, the organization we belong to is CASE, the Council for the Advancement and Support of Education. Last year, it actually won the CASE Gold Award, the International Gold Award, as the most outstanding presentation of science writing of any university in the world. And to us, this is why most of us are here to do this, which is we want to tell these great stories about you and the work you do, and why the public should care about it. And I'm very also proud to tell you, David, that the guy who just left, we hired him. Yeah, Todd Bates, who's our newest communicator, science writer, and I think we're going to get back to the office and encourage Todd to get in touch with you. So if you're going to be want to do more with us, he'd be the perfect person for you to work with. So these are the people we hire, and this is the kind of work that we love to do. And Sarah talked about how hard the work was. I got to tell you, it was a true pleasure to work with Sarah and to work with the kind of important research that she was doing. This is why we do what we do, and this is the thing that we really want to do more, frankly, more than anything else.
Please ask your question if you start by identifying who you are, and then pose your question, and we will repeat it back so it makes sure that it's on the recording. Peter.
You know, it's a similar issue that we have with the Center for Alcohol Studies, where they publish a journal of very interesting research, and most of their authors are from outside of Rutgers. I think I met with somebody, Sarah, is it? She's relatively new, publicity. And I do think that there are enough Rutgers authors. We recently did a piece on the 250th books that was Rutgers Press related, and that was a very successful article. The Ledger did it as well. But I think that I just got the new catalog from her, and I was going to look through it, and I think that we really should be promoting the Rutgers Press books where you are working with Rutgers authors. There was one there that I thought was awesome, all about Brooklyn, right? I said, oh, not a Rutgers author. I want to do that story. But I think for the most part, that's what we should be concentrating on. Do you agree, Greg?
I do, but yes, I do. But no, it's quite all right. One thing, Carl and I do a lot of presentations, and we often bicker, and people find it entertaining. But I'm not going to do it this time. To your point, Peter, I think that a lot of it I also view as kind of akin to when we talk about collaboration among different institutions. One thing we can help you with is if you say, for example, have an author who has an affiliation elsewhere, like they might be writing through Rutgers University Press, but say, for the sake of argument, they have a relationship with Duke. They work there. We actually are part of national organizations where we have colleagues in these places, and we can actually do outreach on your behalf so that even if we're not the ones actually doing the promotion, we can work with the appropriate people at these institutions and make them better aware of the work that's going on. And maybe that's a way that we can kind of combine our resources, much like we worked with Michigan on Debbie's research related to Happy Wife, Happy Life. We can work on it that way. I mean, we do have an issue with, we got a lot of things going on and a lot of people doing stuff, and you and I have talked about that privately before. We happen to live on the same block. And so I want to be helpful, and maybe that's a way to do it. But, we should definitely talk about that and see kind of what you think are the books and the publications that have the best chance, the highest likelihood of getting attention, because it does reflect well on Rutgers University Press, and maybe we can figure out a way to do it that way.
I guess my answer is a little bit different. I think it's been a theme here today that there are two main ways to get into the media. One is on the research product, and the other is to more generally be the go-to person, right? So someone else does a study or some event happens in the world and you're the expert. And it's hard to get to either of those categories until you publish something really in the formal journals. But one piece of advice that I have it reflects a different role I have as a journal editor. Once you publish your work in a journal, you can use their infrastructure to help get publicity for your work. And I suggest this because it's good for the author, but it's also a way to take the burden off the Rutgers media folks who have a lot of demands on them. So for instance, almost all the major publishing houses that do journals, Oxford Press, Sage, Elsevier, they have blogs. So for my journal, I invite one author per issue to write a blog, then Oxford Press spreads it out, for instance. So I think there are little things you can do even once that journal article comes out. You might think it's obscure. You might think maybe it's not yet of interest to media folks here, but the publisher blog will be speaking to and tweeting to the readership of the journal. So if you feel like maybe it's theoretically at a level that the Newark Star Ledger might not be terribly excited about, there are other user bases. So I think we're talking about mass media, but there are other networks that I think could be useful once you place that first article. And then likewise, professional associations. When you present, I know he's a sociologist at American Sociological Association or APA, they also have in-house PR people that will help spread the word about your study if they find it interesting. Then you guys can step in and work on it together. So I think that's a way to think about it when you're still kind of in the weeds, kind of developing your career. But others might have more to say relatedly.
I would encourage you to try to get word out on your work. But the first thing that came to my mind was work with your mentors, work with these folks here, especially if it's somewhat controversial what you're doing, because you've got to be really careful and be prepared. In the climate change realm, if you speak, you can be prepared to get hate mail and worse in some respects. So you have to be prepared for that. And I think you have to be very careful how you manage that, especially when you're in the early part of your career. It's good to be recognized, but if it's quite controversial, you want to be recognized for the right reasons. And you have to play that very carefully. So I would really look to others for mentorship at this point in your career.
I think those are both David and Debbie's advice is very, very good. The one thing I would add is that this is a process. If you're in a journal, if you're on a blog, general interest journalists who have an interest in that area read these kinds of publications. We were talking about before how journalists read our site. Well, one of the things you have is when you're in a trade publication or a discipline-oriented journal, the people who cover, not necessarily, it's not like there's a beat reporter covering sociology, but what is the topic that just in general, that your research is surrounding? Okay, now that's a fascinating. Actually a fascinating topic, and one that I could see would have a lot of resonance with the public and with the media. I think David's absolutely right. Make sure you got all your ducks in a row and know what you're doing. But you could have something that gets placed in a professional journal or a discipline-oriented journal, and a reporter who would be interested in that might find it and then look to talk to you. One of the great advantages these days of having an internet-based information system is once something gets out on the internet, it's there. And one of the things we have found is that we'll put things out like Q&As and things like that, and then they will live for a very long time. And reporters looking for a topic will see something and said, "Oh, this might be somebody worth talking to." So I think the slow and steady approach to this is a good way to do it for you. And again, we're happy to help you as a resource. I can, as you're talking about North Korea, I can think because there was just that issue with and I'm a University of Virginia alum. The UVA student who just got arrested in North Korea. So there are clearly issues in the news, and a lot of it has to depend on what you're willing to talk about and what you feel comfortable talking about. But we can work with you on that, and we're happy to do so.
I was just going to say one more thing. You can really start your own blog on the topic, even though you haven't perhaps published the paper. I just was sent a blog by somebody at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. His passion, his specialty, he's a fourth-year medical student, is healthcare for millennials. And it's interesting, and he has an interesting story. And I was thinking, we might do a piece on him.
To add to that, to advertise that we have this online presence workshop coming up, but one will be on blogging. And I think, especially your topic is very political. So I think partly it's finding the right blog. So obviously HuffPo is kind of a tough one to strike for, but there's the conversation. There are other ones that, talk to your mentors or Pat or me, I see Pat in the room, and we can think about possible venues. And of course there's competition, right? Everybody wants to write for 0 cents a word, which is now the current going rate at most of these blogs. But I think they're out there, and then you can link it to your website, your pubs, even if they're pre-pub, right, PDFs. So I think it's kind of finding the right audience again, and come to the blogging session, and we'll have real experts. I'm just kind of making this up.
It's funny. It reminds me, I used to be a newspaper reporter, and years ago I had an editor who used to say the answer to every adult question is, it depends. And in some ways, it really does depend on the relationships we might have with people. We can certainly help you with that if it's somebody with whom we have a relationship, and we can kind of not necessarily get the questions in advance, but say to them, and you can do this yourself, which is, I'm happy to talk to you, but I want to get a better sense of what your story's about. What kinds of information are you looking for? And what's the terminology is what your angle is, or something along those lines. And then what you can do is then you can start to tease out from them kind of where they're going with it. Another thing you can do, we talk about the internet, is you can look them up. You can see what they've written before. That's something, when we have someone who contacts us who we've never heard from before, we will do some background work on them and try to figure out kind of what has interested them in the past, what kinds of stories they've done in the past. Particularly if they've done a Q&A with someone, then you get a sense of the kinds of questions that they ask, and that's a way you can do that too. But we're always happy to help with that, and if it's somebody with whom we have knowledge, we can tell you what we think about the relationship with someone. And quite frankly, it's interesting. David was talking before about and by the way, I agree with you about talking to everybody. Not only because we should talk to everybody, but because the person working for the Fish Rep might be at the New York Times in 5 years, and you don't want to blow the relationship. But part of what we try to do is we try to be as responsive as possible. And we also try to assess kind of where we think these things are going. And one thing we can also do is we can help protect faculty, because there might be someone who comes out who might portray themselves as, this is all just sweetness and light, and we know what some of the trapdoors are to look out for.
One thing I would add is that when you work with us, if you have a story you want out there, we do let you, we will send you the questions. It just happened with the instant messaging and sleep story. I don't think that the professor had really been out there before and was nervous about even us putting together our story. And she said, well, could I get the questions first? And we said, of course. So we're easy.
I think also, realizing that you don't have to answer every question that's being asked to you, that you can delay or say, I'm not sure about that and I'll get back to you. And also, as I had mentioned, even though you may not want to answer some of the questions, thinking about which ones are making you most nervous ahead of time and figuring out how you're going to respond to those, even if it's just a catchphrase that you might want to use to sort of put off answering that question. I found that to be really helpful.
I mean, just two tiny points to that. I think you can ask the reporter, can I see my quotes before you publish them? And some will not show you it typed up, but they might read it back to you. So I think that's something you have at your disposal. Another is just think very differently based on the medium, right? On radio, they have our voice. TV, they have our image. But in print, sarcasm doesn't work, right? You can't, they don't really italicize often. So I think if it's print, you want to think a little bit more carefully and more literally about it, whereas you're not going to get things like expression and facial expression. So I would say ask the reporter, and the Times will give it back to you. I mean, a lot of these really will. They have a vested interest in building a relationship with you as their go-to expert. So it's a two-way street.
And there is a truism in the business, which is when you're talking to a reporter, they control the questions, but you control the answers. And that gets to Sarah's point. This is something we talked about a lot before Sarah did interviews, which was you can, they can't make you answer something. It's to David's point that you don't want to answer. They can't make you go somewhere you don't want to go. And that's just to basically say that's something where you should feel empowered. And we can help you be prepared for that. But you can feel empowered that no matter what they do, you don't have to. You don't work for them. They're not the king. You don't have to decide that everything that they ask is worthy of an answer. And you don't be rude about it, but you just kind of give the answer that you think you should be giving and talk about the point that you think you should be talking about.
I don't think there is any topic that's immune to it. I mean, I used to have this game with Steve Sterling from the Ledger on a run-of-the-mill daily weather event article. How many of those comments at the bottom would it take to get to a climate change denier? And usually it's about 3 or 4, even though if it has nothing to do with the topic of the day, they'll bring it on. You're taking a chance out there in some respects, and this is a decision, a personal decision you have to make if you're talking about something that could raise some controversy. Some people will shy away from it. Some love to take it head on. I think I've tried to stay off the front pages. It's my nature, talk in a probabilistic manner, but I have colleagues who would love to shoot for the hip because they just like that approach. So I think you have to stay within your comfort zone when it comes to that. But all that being said, you still could have someone come out of the blue, come and make some type of a threat. I've never had death threats, but I've been slammed pretty hard in some cases. Unjustly, of course. But that just comes with the territory. I think it just comes with territory. You have to be ready to defend yourself, but you also have to be willing to accept it if it comes and deal with it accordingly. Or some people just will stay away. It's not for everyone. It's just not, just like you've had students, and some of the students are made to be professorial types and get up, and others have a terrific career in the research realm. I mean, everyone's a little bit different. And for some, this is something you naturally can do. Others, steer clear.
This actually gets to a point that I was going to make earlier, because when we're talking about some of the individual research projects that people work on, one of the things that helps in terms of conveying credibility and conveying that sense that what you're saying is something that people need to take seriously and give respect to is passion. David talks about the weather and talks about climate with a passion. I've worked with Debbie. We've worked all together, and one of the things you see is people who are passionate about what they're doing, who take it seriously, who understand that what they're doing is important, conveying that sense to people and talking about the things that you really do care about. It's like one of the sessions that's going to come up later is how to write op-eds. And the first thing we always say is, what's the first rule of an op-ed? Feel strongly about something. Don't feel, and this gets to your point, David, which is don't feel like you have to go out there because all your colleagues are going out there. Go out there when it's something you feel strongly about and something you really want to talk about and something that you're sure about and something that so you're on solid ground with that. And then if you get some crank, I should introduce you to my 80-year-old father who has decided to dedicate the rest of his life to disproving climate change. You really want to have a 2-hour dinner with him hearing about the whole hockey stick thing. Seriously, I know exactly what you're talking about. But, if it's something you feel really strongly about and something you feel like that the public really could benefit from it, then I think to some extent the crazies who try to claw at you, I don't think they're going to get to you as much. I think when people really get affected by this is when they feel like, well, I just have to be out there talking about something, and then somebody will slam them, and it's kind of like, well, was it worth it? Well, if it's something you really care about, it can be worth it. There are fights worth having, and there are confrontations worth being a part of if it's something you really feel strongly about.
If you want to hear from someone who is right there in the mainstream, who was on the front page of the New York Times in 1988 saying, we have seen climate change and it is caused by us. His name is Jim Hansen, former professor of mine at Columbia. I've known Jim over 35 years. He'll be on campus on February 9th giving a talk over in Douglas Center. I don't know. He has some other venues that he's going to be talking to grad students, maybe some undergrads. I know I'm going to be meeting with him a little, but I don't know how accessible he'll be, but he'll be giving a talk. And Jim has taken it the step as a NASA scientist to get into all kind of controversy. Now Jim's retired and he's working through Columbia, but he has treading that line between being a scientist, and he's an excellent scientist, and being an environmental activist, talking about his grandchildren's future and things. And he's been arrested in front of the White House for a demonstration and all. So Jim would be a very interesting person to listen to and ask this question of when he comes to campus in just 2 weeks.
I really want to thank you for your comments. They're very astute. And one thing I'd like to say about working with our office is that we really try to put, a lot of us are former newspaper reporters in our office, and we really try to put on the journalist hat when we write a story about your work, because we're thinking the way they might think and the story they would like to write, so that we can get them that. But often what we do, it's a real back and forth with the professor. We'll interview you like a journalist might and put together the piece, and in this case, you do review it. And then the professor comes back and wants to add more jargon because you feel like, oh no, you're dumbing down the study. And it's really a negotiation, because we then try to phrase it another way. We're thinking of the general public, and we go back and forth in a very usually friendly way until we reach a compromise. And usually once a faculty member goes through this process with us and it's successful, then they begin to trust us more. And we learn to be comfortable with each other. But it does take time. It's a learning experience.
I was going to add a couple of things. One, when you talk about the sound bites, this is to the point that was made, Sarah made the point earlier, be ready to think about what you're going to talk about. And if you feel like you're going to, be prepared to say, okay, if there's going to be a sound bite, I'll think of it in advance. And one of the things when we do these Q&As particularly is we're putting into the language, which the professor sees and approves, that frames it in a way so that at least then when you're talking to the reporter, we're out the gate with the first interpretation of what you're doing in such a way that at least then they're not coming at it cold, and they're not coming at it from a position of, quite frank, and not to use it pejoratively, but ignorance about the topic. Because you obviously know a lot more about the topic than we do, but by working with you, we can help you figure out a way so that when you're talking to somebody who has no knowledge of the topic and is coming at it cold, can help. The other thing we like to do, and we were talking before about how you publish academic research and then someone might see it, when we're putting something out, we will also put links in to the work that's driving the story or driving the Q&A, so that if people really do want to see more information, they can click on it directly and find out exactly about your work. So it really does work both ways.
You work more than 40 hours a week, a lot more. It's a personal decision I made when I got to Rutgers. I went up the chain pretty quickly, became full professor. I knew when I accepted the position of state climatologist, where we do research, gather information. I run a 60-station weather network that reports from everywhere in the state every 5 minutes. That's even more time consuming. And I chaired my department for a dozen years. I was putting distinguished professor on the back burner because that's not how you're judged at Rutgers. So that was a personal decision I made to spend the time. and forego perhaps that direction to do what I wanted to do. Isn't that nice to have the opportunity to do what you really want to do? But as state climatologist, I accepted that obligation to be part of that service. Now it's evolved. There are not too many state climatologists that get this many interviews, but others are involved in many other interesting things around the nation. So again, it's just the direction I decided to take things as when I accepted the responsibility to be the state climatologist. But with that, there were sacrifices I might have made. I'm still able. I haven't gone since grad school, excuse me, a single day without a federal research grant to study snow. So somehow I've been able to manage that. But I know it has interfered with that. And so there are going to be some faculty that say, I'm on the fast track to distinguished professor. I don't want to deal with this. And that's fine. It takes all types to here at the university. We all can't be motor mouths like me talking to the media. But so it's just a matter of what you want to do and what you might enjoy doing. If you hate doing it and you have other ambitions, other goals, don't do it. Although I do happen to think that as a state university, we have an obligation to do that. So I'll only take that answer so far from a colleague without saying, hey, this university's been good to you. The profession's been good to you. You owe something back as well.
I would add one minor thing. If kind of the moral giving back argument doesn't work, there's a really instrumental reason. I mean, if you are funded by NIH, some of us know, a factor that goes into allocations at the various NIH or grant giving bodies is what impact do you have? And media attention matters. So if you say it was a study of marriage, but it was an NIH study, and then you do the link to the number, that's actually something that's really valuable, not necessarily in a direct way, but the organizations, at least the federal organizations that give us money, need to justify their existence with Congress and policymakers, right? So that's yet another way. If you can't appeal to their heart, maybe their wallet might respond. And Jeanette can speak to that as well.
I'm going to agree with you and take it one step further. Before I worked in PR, I was a political journalist, and one of the rules in politics is if you don't define yourself, your opponents will do it for you. It's not even the fact that Rutgers wouldn't have a media presence. It's that Rutgers would have a very different media presence. One of the things that we spend a lot of time analyzing is how much positive and negative coverage we get. And one of the reasons we love telling these research stories, particularly these really big research stories, is how much of a reach they could possibly have. You look at 2,000 plus stories about climate change, or 400 stories about marriage research, or Sarah's research did not have that volume, but you're talking NPR and the Washington Post, and a very favorable story in the Star Ledger. So that's part of it as well. I mean, there are people out there who are going to write about us no matter what, and it's really good to be able to give them good stories. And again, not to overstress the point, but to even take the pieces that we're writing about people like you and your colleagues and getting them out there to people without any filter whatsoever. I mean, this is one of the, I mentioned before, I don't want to lose sight of the fact more than 3,700 of these in the last 6 years. That's like 1.5 stories a day that are positive, that are just what we're creating that other people are just using. And that has a tremendous impact on how people around this state and beyond are perceiving our institution. So I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's not even a matter of not being out there. It's a matter of trying to make sure we're out there with our best foot forward.
Question. Right.
Again, I'm going to get back to the it depends thing and not to duck the question, but it really does depend on what kind of publications you're talking about. The Huffington Post, for example, you can set up an account and they will take what where you can basically send them what you write. I have an account. I wrote one op-ed 2 years ago that got out there. I haven't done any since then, but you can set up an account and then basically you'll be out there. That doesn't mean everyone's going to be reading you. I think what you think about is what are the most important places you want to be, and you start with the most important for you, and then work your way down. Now, certain places do have rules about this. The New York Times will not take anything if it's appeared anywhere else. The Newark Star Ledger will not take anything if it has appeared anywhere else in New Jersey. Sometimes you can get away with, sending something to multiple locations. Like the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Bergen Record. Sometimes you can get a kind of a double bagger out of that one. But the other thing is to be prepared for a wait. Like if you send something to the Times, they don't have any obligation to get back to you. So sometimes it takes a while before you figure it out, and sometimes you have to. Usually the rule we have is wait about 10 days to 2 weeks, and if you don't have it, then you bag that. So to me, it really, you take it upon yourself to say, do I really want to be in the Atlantic? If I really want to be in the Atlantic, then that's the first place I should go. If I really want to be in Slater's Salon, that's the first place I should go. And then you work down from there. And frankly, sending something out to a large number, unless you're sending it out to like regional newspapers where they don't have circulation overlap, that's not a problem. But if you really want to send it to like a high prestige, high visibility in national or international publication, my advice to you is start where you really want to be, and then work your way down. And that way, because again, part of what you're trying to do is build a relationship. You don't want this to just be a one-off. You feel very strongly about this. You might feel very strongly about something else in a couple of years, and you don't want to burn a bridge. So that would be the way I would do it. It's and then a lot of times you look at the market. If you want to be out in California, you start with the LA Times. It's the biggest, and it's the one that people are going to read the most. One of the issues you deal with magazines these days is a lot of those magazines are online. Newsweek is entirely online now. A lot of what the Atlantic publishes is online. So in some ways, it's a little easier, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the audience you're looking for. So I think the best way to do it is to kind of be true to where you want to be, and then start there and work your way through it from that.
Also, there's a publication called Writer's Market that they update every year, and you can get it in the library. It's a thick volume, and they go through with the main editors at all these publications, and they'll explain what they're looking for, whether they want it in a query form rather than full submissions, and it's all spelled out pretty well, and they even give you contact names.
Well, we all hope to see all of you next Friday, the 5th. Can't believe it's February, but Friday, February 5th in the morning in the same room, we have our next session on communicating with the mass media on air and in print. And Jocelyn Crowley of Blaustein organized, and the panelists will include those who actually are on air as host and producer, and they'll give real precise tips about how to communicate. So we hope to see you then, and please join me in thanking our terrific panelists. We were very fortunate to have Sarah, Greg, Carla, and David, and thank you to Kim for helping to bring these people together. So thank you to the panelists, and thank you for showing up.